Welcome once again, my fellow manipulators of Digital Fate. I'm Richie, this is Capricorn, and if you thought that spoiler season for Foundations was over, think again. Because even though the entire base set of Foundations has been spoiled, and I have made videos for all of those cards, in fact, I'm going to link those in the description and in the comments so that you guys can check those out if you're interested, we still have a starter collection coming, and even though at first glance, I'm thinking no one's really going to pay attention to this unless you're a new player. That's not the case, because the starter collection is actually bringing a ton of crazy rares that are reprints forward into standard. So they're going to be standard legal, and they're only available in the starter collection. All of these are cards that you will not find in boosters for Foundations, but they are going to be incredibly relevant in standard, and even if you're not building your deck around these cards, you're absolutely going to face off against them if you're playing standard. So it's really important that you know what's coming and what's out there, and there's just a ton of craziness coming in this starter collection. Now, the one thing we're not sure about is how this starter collection is coming to Arena. My guess is they'll probably just make some sort of a starter collection bundle available to buy, similar to the starter collection that you can buy for physical Magic cards, which is what this product is. And it'll just be, you know, a one and done, you buy it. Some people have speculated they'll insert these cards into Foundations boosters on Arena, but only on Arena. I don't think they'll do that because Foundations was balanced around being a limited format, a draftable set for the cards that are in the set, and none of these cards in the starter collection are a part of the limited environment for Foundations. They will not be in draft, they will not be in sealed, they are only available in this starter collection, and I really have a hard time believing that they would mess with that balance by just randomly sticking all of these rares into the boosters. So I don't think that's the direction they'll go. But when we do find out how they're going to do it, I'll make sure to post a video with my thoughts on that, inform you guys on what's going on as far as Arena and how you can get these cards, and if I think it's a fair way to, you know, bring the cards to you without maybe squeezing you for every nickel and dime. That being said, we're going to dive right in because there's a ton of cards to get through. Make sure you like the video if you haven't already. Helps me get out the video to so many more people, helps the channel grow. I appreciate it so much. If you don't like the video, you find no value here, hit the dislike button. That's fine too. Whatever. Also subscribe if you're new so you never miss an upload. Tons of craziness on the way, but let's do it. First off, we have Angelic Destiny. 2 white and 2 for an enchantment aura. Enchants a creature. Enchanted creature gets +4/+4, has flying and first strike, and is an angel in addition to its other types. But the best part is, when enchanted creature dies, you return Angelic Destiny to its owner's hand. This card is super powerful because every time they kill the thing that it's on, it just comes back to your hand and then goes on your next best creature, and you always have this insanely huge, threatening creature on the field that has flying and first strike. The big downside with a card like this is if they exile your creature, it's not going to trigger that dies ability, and Angelic Destiny won't go back to your hand, and then it'll just be gone forever. So right now, the way standard is, there's a lot of exile removal, and more specifically, there's Sunfall, which is an exile sweeper. So I don't really think this is going to be quite as impactful as it could be, or as I would want it to be, until Sunfall rotates out in less than a year. But I do feel like at some point this could have a lot of potential of being super powerful, especially in a deck that's just going wide with a bunch of creatures and then topping out with Angelic Destiny, where you can just keep making one of them an insane must-deal-with threat. Seems pretty good there, so we'll have to wait and see. Next up, we've got Charming Prince, 1 white and 1 for a 2/2 human noble. When it enters, you choose one. Scry 2, gain 3 life, or exile another target creature you own and return it to the battlefield under your control at the beginning of the next end step. This guy's mostly good in Flicker and Blink decks, and we are seeing a lot of support coming for Flicker and Blink, not only in this set, but we've also gotten a little bit in Bloomburrow and Duskmourn leading into this set, so I wouldn't be surprised to see a standard legal Blink deck be an actual thing in standard after this set drops. And if it is, this guy will be a huge part of that. If you get him later, he does the blinking stuff you want to do. If you have him early, he can scry into what you need or give you some life to race against aggro. Super versatile. Love seeing Charming Prince come. Next up, we've got Felidar Retreat, 1 white and 3 for an enchantment with landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, you choose one. Create a 2/2 white cat beast creature token. Put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Those creatures gain vigilance until end of turn. So you can either buff up your whole team in Alpha Strike while also keeping them as blockers because of the vigilance, or you can just keep spitting out 2/2 cat tokens. I really wonder how viable Landfall is going to be moving forward. I know there's at least a couple other Landfall cards coming, but I'm not sure if we're quite at the critical mass that we need to really make Landfall its own archetype. That being said, Cat Tribal is definitely coming with Foundations, and this spits out cats, so maybe it can just be a nice addition to a deck like that. Let me know how you're feeling about Felidar Retreat down below. I think it's a powerful card, but it needs the right decks to really take off. Next up, we've got Fumigate, 2 white and 3 for a sorcery. Destroy all creatures. You gain 1 life for each creature destroyed this way. We already have a 4 mana Wrath of God variant coming in the base set for Foundations, so I don't know how much play Fumigate's going to see, but it's nice to have options, right? And it's nice that even if you don't like any of the sweepers that are in all the other standard sets, you've still got 2 options for sweepers and Foundations, one in the base set and one in this starter set here. And in a life gain deck, maybe this matters even more. Maybe that 1 life for each creature destroyed can actually get you triggers that end up being relevant. Just kind of like from a flavor perspective, seeing this come to standard. Next up, we've got Linden the Steadfast Queen, 3 white for a 3/3 legendary human noble with vigilance, and whenever a white creature you control attacks, you gain 1 life. Really good card for mono white aggro. Just keep getting life gain triggers. Could be super good in the life gain deck moving forward, although you'd have to balance out the need for some of the really good life gain style cards in black versus this wanting you to play everything mono white and being hard to cast if you're not in a monocolor deck because of the 3 white pips. So if there's some balance there that we can find, Linden might be a really strong part of the life gain deck, but we'll have to wait and see. Next up, we've got Mentor of the Meek, 1 white and 2 for a 2/2 human soldier. Whenever another creature you control with power 2 or less enters, you may pay 1. If you do, draw a card. This is nice. A lot of card advantage here for, the power 2 or less style deck, the go wide deck. What's cool about this card is it'll trigger even off token creatures. So if you have a way of like spitting out a bunch of tokens, you just pay 1 mana for each of them and draw a bunch of cards, and that seems pretty good. That being said, I do think there are more efficient ways to draw cards off of creatures entering these days than having to play a Mentor of the Meek, hope it survives a cut down or a shock, and then still have mana up to actually draw the cards. So I don't know how relevant this is actually going to be in Standard, but it's cool that it's there. There's potential. Next up, we've got Regal Caracal. 2 white and 3 for a 3/3 cat. Other cats you control get +1/+1 and have lifelink. And when this creature enters, you create 2 1/1 white cat creature tokens with lifelink. So if you had any doubts about Cat Tribal being an actual thing in Standard, every time you see one of these cat payoffs, that should be more and more and more, that doubt should be put to rest. Because this card is nuts if the rest of the cards in the deck that are Cat Tribal are nuts, right? If this just comes down on 5 and just adds insane value to your Cat Tribal deck, it seems pretty nuts to me. Yeah, it's 3 bodies, it's 5/5 worth of power with 3 bodies, all of them have lifelink, all of them get +1/+1, it's just, man, it's insane, right? So it's actually 7 power, 7 toughness, because it buffs the tokens that it gives you too. The only downside here is 5 mana might be a bit much for a Cat Tribal deck. It might want to be a faster, more low-to-the-ground aggro deck, and if that's the case, this might be win more. But the power is definitely there, so we'll see. Next up, we've got Zetalpa, Primal Dawn, 2 white and 6 for a 4/8 legendary Elder Dinosaur. It has Flying, Double Strike, Vigilance, Trample, and Indestructible. As if we didn't have enough crazy options for Reanimator decks these days, now we've got Zetalpa. This card is kind of nuts, having Double Strike and Trample as well as Indestructible. It's everything. This card is bananas. That being said, like I said earlier, there's a lot of exile removal in Standard right now, so this might not be as good as it used to be, but still a really strong card. Next up, we've got blue cards. Before I go any further, I am going to note I'm only going over the rares and mythics in this starter set, not the commons and uncommons, specifically because the starter set isn't a part of the limited format at all, so those commons and uncommons start to matter a lot less. But the rares and the mythics are going to make the biggest possible impact in Standard, which is really going to be the one format where this starter set makes the biggest impact in general. So we're going to cover all of the rares and the mythics, but there are a bunch of commons and uncommons in this set that could end up being relevant. So if you're interested in those, I'll put a link to the full spoiler list that Wizards of the Coast put out with all of the cards, so that you can check out the commons and uncommons as well. This is Arcanus the Omnipotent, a 3/4 legendary wizard for 6 mana, 3 blue and 3. You can tap him to draw 3 cards. You can also pay 4 mana to return Arcanus to its owner's hand. This card was awesome when it first came out. I remember using it. I believe it was Odyssey block that this card dropped in, if I remember correctly. And it's super powerful. Just give you a free Ancestral Recall every single turn by tapping him, and he protects himself for 4 mana. He was a super good draw value engine in control decks that were going to hold up counter spells and then just potentially use the mana to save Arcanus if they needed to. That being said, today's Standard, this might be way too expensive to see play, especially because it doesn't really have a way to protect itself the turn it comes down. It doesn't, come out with flash on the opponent's turn or anything like that. But there is that new fairy that gives everything flash, so I don't know. Maybe in a deck with that, even if this doesn't end up being very viable competitively in Standard, thematically I like that Arcanus is here. Such a cool card, and reminds me of a time in Magic's history that I truly loved. So, thanks Arcanus. Next up, we've got Dictate of Kruphix. This is 2 blue and 1 for an enchantment with flash, and at the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card. The flash is what makes this really good, because most symmetrical card draw cards, they allow your opponent to draw first. The best example is Howling Mine, right? You play Howling Mine on 2. Your opponent gets first crack at drawing a card off of Howling Mine. But with Dictate of Kruphix, you can flash it out after their draw step, so that you're the one who ends up being the first person to be able to draw off of it, and that makes it way better. It also means that you can wait to decide to play it until after you know if you need to interact with the opponent's stuff. So you can be holding up removal at instant speed, you can be holding up counter spells, and then if whatever your opponent's doing on their turn isn't too much of a problem for you, you can just hold on to those cards and just flash in the Dictate of Kruphix at the end of turn, and then start drawing cards, and then go back to holding up all of that interaction. So, really cool card here. Might see play in control decks. But next up, we've got Finale of Revelation. This is 2 blue and X for a sorcery. You draw X cards. If X is 10 or more, instead shuffle your graveyard into your library, draw X cards, and untap up to 5 lands. You have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. Exile Finale of Revelation. This is another one where thematically I love seeing it come back. It reminds me of a part of Magic's history, but I don't know how relevant it's going to be in Standard. Paying 12 mana to get to that 10 card threshold is a lot, and I think if you have that much mana, there's way better things you can do with that mana that will just win you the game, without having to just draw 10 cards and then find a way to win the game. So I don't know how relevant this will actually be, although the fact that it does untap 5 lands means maybe you draw into your win condition, untap the 5 lands to use the win condition. So there is potential there for the right deck, maybe some kind of combo deck to want to play this card, but I'm going to lean on thinking probably not. Next up, we've got Harbinger of the Tides. 2/2 Merfolk Wizard for 2 blue mana. You may cast this card as though it had flash if you pay 2 more to cast it. And when this creature enters, you may return target tapped creature an opponent controls to its owner's hand. I kind of love this. It's sort of like a Mana War, but with a potential way of playing it for cheaper or playing it at instant speed for more, and I like that versatility. Granted, it does need to hit a tapped creature, but still, I think it's really, really good tempo card. And this could see a lot of play if it's in the right deck. Like, specifically, it has me thinking of Merfolk Tribal. For a hot minute there, Merfolk Tribal was a thing in Standard because of the, I believe it was called Hex Mage? Hex something. Merfolk Hex something, right? The card that let all of your Merfolk sacrifice to counter a spell unless they pay 1. That one also had Flash, so maybe there's potential here for Merfolk to get enough new support in the form of Harbinger of the Tides and some other cards that maybe that's a deck again. That could be pretty cool, but we'll have to wait and see. Next up, we've got River's Rebuke. 2 blue and 4 for a sorcery. Return all non-land permanents target player controls to their owner's hand. Pretty simple. One-sided board swipe. I think that's what I like about this the most. Sorry, board wipe, not board swipe. Might as well be a board swipe. Actually, can that be a thing? If it's a bounce board wipe, can we call it board swipe? Can that be a thing? Can that take over? Can that? Yeah, let's make that a thing. That's a thing now. This is a board swipe. Return all non-land permanents target player controls to their owner's hands. Hits all permanents, right? Except for lands, not just their creatures. Doesn't hit any of your stuff. The more I think about this card, the more insane I think it is. It is 6 mana, it is a lot, and most aggro decks have you dead before you can cast this, so that's going to be the most problematic deck that you want to use something like a board swipe against, but I don't know. I still think it could have the potential to be super powerful, so we'll have to wait and see. But next up, we've got Sphinx of the Final Word. This is 2 blue and 5, a whopping 7 mana for a 5/5 flying, hexproof, uncounterable Sphinx. Also, instant and sorcery spells you control can't be countered. They just can't be countered. That's pretty good, right? I like this. I think I would like it more if you could flash it in, but I mean it already does so much, right? The one problem with this card is just that it's so expensive, right? Maybe in a reanimator deck where you reanimate this and you use it to protect your other reanimation spells from counter spells. Probably not. This is one of those cards I think is probably too cute and too win more to actually see play in Standard, but we'll see. We'll see. I could be surprised. Next up, we've got Tempest Djinn. 3 blue mana for a 0/4 flying Djinn. This creature gets +1/+0 for each basic island you control. So this is only relevant in mono blue decks, right? Which is kind of nuts. But, I mean, this does give the potential for mono blue tempo to sort of make a comeback. If you guys remember from a few years ago, mono blue tempo was all the rage in Standard. These days, there are other options that blue is kind of going towards, like the Oculus Haughty Djinn decks and stuff like that. But I don't know. We have seen a few other cards that kind of reinforce the idea that maybe this type of an archetype could make a comeback. We'll have to wait and see. But next up, we've got Voracious Great Shark. This one is exciting to me. A 5/4 shark for 2 blue and 3. It has Flash, and when this creature enters, you counter target artifact or creature spell. This was legal in Standard a few rotations ago, and I actually played a Flash/counterspell style deck in that meta at the time, and it was awesome. It was just like so many different cards that you could flash in that would all stop what the opponent's doing and also give you board presence. This being kind of the top end most expensive thing in that deck. And I wonder if we can do something similar here. There's definitely going to be a really powerful Flash deck in the new Standard. There already is, in my opinion. I have it up on the channel. Actually, I think it's one of the newest deck techs that I posted up on the channel is a Flash deck, Azorius with a splash of red. That deck's already nuts, and we have a ton of Flash support coming in this set. So Flash decks are going to get even better and be a thing. But I wonder if, this kind of Flash meets counter magic, sort of reactionary Flash deck rather than tempo Flash deck might be viable. Love seeing Great Shark come back. I'm going to try it for sure. Next up, we're moving on to black. This is Demonic Pact. 2 black and 2 for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, choose one that hasn't been chosen. This enchantment deals 4 damage to any target and you gain 4 life. Target opponent discards 2 cards, you draw 2 cards, or you lose the game. This card has always been really amazing. You just have to find a way of getting rid of it before you hit that 4th upkeep where you have to lose the game, right? You could give it to your opponent, and then they have to choose lose the game if the other 3 have already been chosen. And there is a deck right now in Standard where it's possible to just donate a bunch of things that really hurt your opponent and sort of build the deck around that. That's already sort of a thing. Right now it's kind of a meme, but if we're getting more support for that, like Demonic Pact, it might be more viable and actually more of a real thing. But what I'm most excited about doing with Demonic Pact is sacrificing it. We have a lot more things in Standard now that can actually sacrifice enchantments, especially on the heels of Duskmourn, whereas it was very rare prior to Duskmourn to really find anything that could sacrifice an enchantment, and especially outside of bargain abilities. It was really, really rare. I think Braids was the only card that could. But now we have a bunch of ways that we can sacrifice enchantments. So maybe you're using bargain spells to sack it, or maybe you're sacking it to like Disturbing Mirth in Duskmourn and stuff like that. Super easy to get a ton of value off this and then just sack it before you die. My favorite way to use this is absolutely going to be with Beseech the Mirror, because you get all the value out of your Demonic Pact, and then you sacrifice it to Beseech the Mirror to find another Demonic Pact, put it into play, and just start getting more value again. And you can just keep doing that. Or you can just sack the Demonic Pact to find something else as well. Include some, silver bullet targets to find in case you need something more specific rather than the Demonic Pact. So I think there's a lot of versatility in a deck that tries to use this card that way. That's absolutely something I'm going to brew the first week this set is live, because that's going to be insane. So love seeing Demonic Pact come back. Next up we have Desecration Demon. This is 2 black and 2 for a 6/6 flying demon. At the beginning of each combat, any opponent may sacrifice a creature of their choice. If a player does, tap this creature and put a +1/+1 counter on it. Pretty interesting card. Very beefy and big for its mana cost. So the idea is you get a overrate creature for what you're paying, but then the opponent has a way to keep it from killing them. But if they do, it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and eventually start wiping out more and more creatures on their side of the board. So it's kind of a short-term gain for a long-term loss. It's slow, right? I don't know if in today's Standard it's really quite good enough, but what I will say is we do have Unholy Annex, and a pseudo-demon tribal deck is doing super well on the ranked ladder right now in Standard using Unholy Annex. So it's possible seeing a pretty decently on-rate demon here that can be a good win condition might make the cut in a deck where it gets that extra synergy from the Annex. So it's possible. No matter what, I love seeing more demons come into the game, come into Standard. So next up, we've got Dread Summons, 2 black and X for a sorcery. Each player mills X cards, and then for each creature card put into a graveyard this way, you create a tapped 2/2 black zombie creature token. So if you can just ramp to a whole bunch of mana, you can mill a whole bunch of cards and make a whole bunch of zombies. Does this want to go in Zombie Tribal? It might take too long to get there. Does this want to go in a ramp deck? Maybe, but there also might be other better payoffs. It's really hard to know for sure if this card makes the cut in Standard right now, but we'll have to wait and see when the set comes out. Next up, we've got Kalastria Highborn, 2 black mana for a 2/2 vampire shaman. Whenever this creature or another vampire you control dies, you may pay pay 1 black. Why did I say green? If you do, target player loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. Pretty decent. If there ends up being a vampire deck, this is going to absolutely be a part of it. If there ends up being a sacrifice deck that also uses a lot of vampires, this gets even better. Start paying an extra 1 mana every time you're enabling your sacrifice payoffs, and you're also draining for 2 in the process. That being said, this card does require very specific decks in order to function at its full potential, and I'm not 100% sure we're quite there yet. I almost feel like my gut tells me that this card is here as a sign of things to come, and that down the line we'll eventually hit this sort of threshold of vampire and sacrifice payoffs to finally glue those archetypes together enough to make a card like this really sing, but probably not right away. That's what my gut says, but I don't know, I could be wrong. Maybe it has enough support just in standard when Foundation hits. We'll have to wait and see. Next up, we've got Midnight Reaper. Speaking about sacrifice decks, this is a 3/2 zombie knight for 1 black and 2, and whenever a non-token creature you control dies, this creature deals 1 damage to you, and you draw a card. This card's amazing. This card is super good in sacrifice decks because not only does it give you extra draw potential on every single sacrifice that you're making, but it's more pressure as well. It's a 3 mana, 3 power creature that's also putting pressure on your opponent, or potentially trading with your opponent's creature and then drawing you a card. And even if they use removal on it, it triggers its own ability and you still draw a card off of it, so no matter what, you're 2 for 1-ing. Everything about this card in a sacrifice style deck is amazing. Sacrifice is totally back, and I'm excited to use this card again. But next up, we've got Meosion of Night's Reach. This is 3 black and 5. That's a whopping 8 mana for a 5/2 legendary creature spirit. Meosion of Night's Reach enters with a divinity counter on it if you cast it from your hand, and it has indestructible as long as it has a divinity counter on it, and you can remove a divinity counter from it, and each opponent discards their hand. That is crazy. So there's 2 things that immediately come to mind with this card. The first being, this is super expensive. super expensive. I don't know how viable it is to get this into play, but maybe we reanimate it, maybe it works well in a deck like that. But the other thing that comes to mind is we have plenty of ways to proliferate in standard right now. If you get this out with a divinity counter on it, and then you proliferate to add an additional divinity counter on it, well, now you can make your opponent discard their hand and still keep the indestructible, which means if they have like instant speed removal in their hand and you try to make them discard their hand and then they try to kill the Meosion in response because you remove the divinity counter, well, now they can't because it's got a second divinity counter. So not only do you keep the indestructible and probably win the game, but even if they do start to build up another hand again, you could potentially just make them discard their hand again, which is kind of crazy. Also, I wonder if this will work really well with Tiny Bones, the Bauble Burglar, the new Tiny Bones, where whenever Tiny Bones is in play and they discard a card, you get to exile it with a stash counter, and then you can play those cards, make them discard their hand while Tiny Bones is in play, and then you can play their hand. That seems kind of nutty. So there's definitely potential for this card, but it is super expensive. And so I wonder exactly what that will look like. I'm not entirely sure yet, but I'm excited to find out if this card has any impact on standard, because it's kind of bonkers. Next up, we've got Null Priest of Oblivion. I sort of love this card. This is a 2/1 Vampire Cleric for 1 black and 1. It has lifelink and menace no matter what. So 2/1 lifelink menace for 2, already really good. But it also has a kicker of 1 black and 3. And if you pay the kicker cost, when this creature enters, if it was kicked, return target creature card from your graveyard to your battlefield. To the battlefield, sorry. So you can play this on curve as a really aggressive threat for 2 mana, or if you top deck it a little later in the game, for 6 mana, not only do you get your 2/1 lifelinking menace creature, but you also get your best creature back from the graveyard, and that's an insane amount of value. So it's really the versatility to fill multiple slots to be really good on curve while also being even better as a top deck later on in the game when you're kind of out of gas. That versatility is what makes this card so strong, and I'm really excited to see if this card can pop off in standard. I think the potential is there for sure. Yeah, I don't know if it's going to be a vampire deck or a cleric deck or what it's going to be, but I'm excited to see where this card ends up. Next up, we've got Wishclaw Talisman, 1 black and 1 for an artifact. It enters with 3 wish counters on it. Pay 1, tap, remove a wish counter from this artifact. search your library for a card, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. An opponent gains control of this artifact. Activate only during your turn. This is going to be really cool coming into Standard. It's a tutor that lets your opponent tutor, but then if they tutor again, you get to... If they tutor, you get to tutor a second time. So ultimately, you kind of win that race in a way, which is really cool. But there are some cards in Standard right now that can make even more use of a card like this, like Generous Plunderer. Tutor for what you need. They get control of a tapped Wishclaw Talisman that they can't use right away. And then you can swing in with your Generous Plunderer and deal an extra point of damage, which is pretty cool. You can also use this with the coveted... Is it Coveted Falcon, I believe? Where you can donate things and then steal them back with the Falcon. So if you give them the Wishclaw Talisman just the normal way you would give it to them by tutoring, you can then just swing with your Falcon and just steal it back. And that seems really awesome too. So I actually think this card might be kind of dismissed at first, but I actually think there might be a deck where this ends up being insane. That same Coveted Falcon gets used a lot in the Donate style decks, which tends to be a combo style deck. So being able to have something like this in that deck where you can tutor up your combo pieces and also have the versatility of being able to take it back with the Coveted Falcon just seems perfect to me. So I don't know, maybe that deck will be a real thing finally. It seems like it might be. But next up we've got red cards. This is Ball Lightning. Super stoked to see this in Standard. A 6/1 elemental with trample and haste for 3 red mana. And at the beginning of your end step, you have to sacrifice this creature. Should be pretty good in aggressive decks. Could be cool in a sacrifice deck maybe, since you need to sacrifice it anyway. You can sacrifice it for some value, for some payoff instead, after you swing in for 6. Also might be cool with some of the creatures that can tap and make copies of other creatures, because you slam it, and then you make a copy of it, and then you're swinging in for 12 trample. And that seems pretty cool, so... I think there's a lot of cool ways to experiment with using Ball Lightning in Standard, but I just love the fact that such an old school card is coming back into Standard. I don't know how much of an impact it's going to make, but just having it there just feels good to me. It's like comfort food. Next up, we've got Dragon Master Outcast. This is not comfort food. This is the opposite. This is a 1/1 human shaman for 1 red mana. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 6 or more lands, create a 5/5 red dragon creature token with flying. This card is insane. All you need to do is have out a 1 mana thing when you get to 6 lands, and you start spitting out a 5/5 flyer every single turn. Not only that, but it's a token creature, so maybe you could play it with Caretaker's Talent and start triggering your Caretaker's Talent to draw cards every turn as well. Maybe you play it in a ramp deck so that you can get to 6 lands a lot quicker and start spitting out those dragons even sooner. There's a lot of potential. The possibilities are kind of endless with a card like this. I'm excited to see it back in Standard, but I'm also rolling my eyes at the thought of having to deal with this for the next 5 years. So, or longer, potentially. Scary, scary card. I don't know exactly where it's going to wind up, but I'm terrified. Next up, we've got Harmless Offering, 1 red and 2 for a sorcery. Target opponent gains control of target permanent you control. So even more enabling for that Donate style deck. This really does kind of solidify the fact that that deck's going to be a thing, right? Grixis, give 'em. Grixis, give 'em. Give 'em everything in Grixis. There's just so many things to donate now. There's so many ways to donate them. There's so much synergy between all of the cards. I really think we're hitting critical mass, and that deck's going to be a thing. And that's exciting to me. I like seeing this card here. Next up, we have Lathless Dragon Queen. 2 red and 4 for a 6/6 legendary dragon with flying. Whenever another non-token dragon you control enters, you create a 5/5 red dragon creature token with flying. So, even more ridiculous dragon tribal shenanigans. You can also pay 1 red and 1, and dragons you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. That's all of your dragons that you control for 2 mana. And you can activate it as many times in a turn as you want. So it gives you a way to alpha strike with your huge wide team of dragons and just win the game. What a card. It is a bit expensive. It's 6 mana, but we are finally hitting, again, kind of like a critical mass with dragons as well, where I think we might finally be at a point where Dragon Tribal's good enough to play in Standard. I'm hoping so, because we've gotten a number of really fun, interesting, highly synergistic Dragon Tribal style cards over the last few years, and the Dragon deck just hasn't quite been good enough. It hasn't quite been there, and I've just been waiting to get just enough value and support to really finally push it over the edge and make it a real thing. And this set is definitely bringing a bunch of dragons, and then we've got Tarkir Dragonstorm coming next April, so I definitely think dragons are going to be a thing by then, but they might even be already a thing now with Foundations. We'll have to wait and see. Next up, we've got Red Cap Gutter Dweller. This is already in Standard right now, a 3/3 Goblin Warrior with Menace for 2 red and 2. When it enters, you create 2 1/1 Black Rat creature tokens with this token can't block, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature, and exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. This card does a lot. It's pretty cool. It's not quite seeing play in rat decks right now. Has the potential to see play maybe in exile style decks where you're getting value off playing things from exile. I don't really think this card being in this set is intended to shake up anything right now, but down the line after this card would have rotated out of Standard normally, it could end up being something valuable that sees some use in a deck later on down the line. So it's cool. It's cool that it's in Foundations and that potential will still sit there after the set has come and gone that this was originally in. But next up, we've got Stromkirk Noble, a 1/1 Vampire Noble for 1 red mana. It can't be blocked by humans, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on it. This is a really good 1-drop Vampire. Makes me wonder if maybe Vampire Tribal is actually a thing moving forward. It might be. Or maybe this just goes in a normal aggro deck. It definitely doesn't go in the prowess style mono red aggro decks that we've been seeing lately, but I'm hoping there's sort of a new breed of aggro deck that's a little bit more classic. And a deck like that could make use of Stromkirk Noble. Just starts getting more and more counters, which makes it more likely to get in, harder to block because they'd have to chump, and eventually gets just out of hand. It could be really cool. But next up, we've got Taurian Mauler, a 2/2 shapeshifter for 1 red and 2 with Changeling. So it counts as every creature type. Honestly, Changeling has me the most excited. Imagine putting all of the different Bloomburrow tribal payoffs in the same deck, and then just gluing that together with a bunch of Changeling cards that can get all of the payoffs at the same time. That idea seems insane. I've been wanting to do something like that ever since Bloomburrow came out, and I think we might be getting enough Changeling support in this set to finally make something like that viable. So I'm excited to go that direction, but it's not just the 2/2. This also has, whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So it's got more value, it grows over time. If they don't kill it quick, it's just going to get even bigger. And like I said, it's a Changeling, so it's getting all your Lizard payoffs, it's getting all of your Raccoon payoffs, it's getting all of your Mouse payoffs, it's getting everything. It could be absolutely insane. I'm excited to mess around with it for sure. But next up, we're moving on to the green cards. This is Hero's Bane, 2 green and 3 for a Hydra that is a 0/0, but it enters with 4 +1/+1 counters on it. So it's basically a 5-mana 4/4, but it has the ability to pay 2 green and 2 to put X +1/+1 counters on this creature, where X is its power. So this is definitely a short-term sacrifice for long-term gain kind of card. It comes down as a not very on-rate creature, a very under-rate creature that's overcosted. But if you can manage to stick it and keep it alive long enough to activate that ability a couple times, it becomes absolutely insanely big, gets really out of hand, really quick. I think it might be too slow for Standard, the way it is right now, but the one idea I did have that it could be cool in, potentially, is maybe in an all-will-be-one deck, where every time you put counters on things, you get to deal that much damage to whatever you want. Being able to double the counters on this every turn could be an absolutely insane direct damage trigger with all-will-be-one. So I don't know, that might be cool. It might be too cute and too slow and too win more and all that stuff, but it's nice to still think of ways in which cards are going to have potential, even if they seem like they're not completely viable at first glance. Next up, we've got Predator Ooze. Is Mono Green coming back? I hope so. This is a 1/1 indestructible ooze for 3 green mana. Whenever this creature attacks, you put a +1/+1 counter on it, and whenever a creature dealt damage by this creature this turn dies, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Yeah, it just can't be killed, and it keeps getting bigger. And if you kill things, it gets even more bigger, right? Until it's out of hand. Again, this is kind of held back by the fact that there's so much exile removal in Standard these days, but Sunfall's going to rotate in less than a year. So if we start to see the amount of exile removal in the format kind of drop off from set to set to set, or after rotation happens, we might get to a point where exile removal is somewhat fringe like it used to be again, and maybe cards like this are way more playable and way more of a threat. So it's another one of those cards that I think might be setting itself up for a strong future, but maybe not be quite as good right now. Yeah. But next up, we've got Primal Might, 1 green and X for a sorcery. Target creature you control gets +X/+X until end of turn, and then it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. Now, what's so good about Primal Might is the fact that you can just play it for 1 green mana. You don't have to put anything into X. It can just be a 1 mana fight spell, and then it just scales up from there. So if you need to pump your dude in order to make sure their guy dies, you can. If you need to pump your dude to make sure your guy doesn't die, you can. If you want to dump even more mana than you need to in order to kill theirs and survive, because you want to swing in for even more damage that turn with the additional +X/+X, you can do that too. Primal Might has a lot of versatility in that way, and so I think it's a really good staple to have in Foundations to be a part of Standard moving forward, as sort of like your baseline for fight spells. Next up, we've got Primeval Bounty. 1 green and 5 for an enchantment. Whenever you cast a creature spell, you create a 3/3 green beast creature token. And whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you put 3 +1/+1 counters on target creature you control. And then it also has a landfall ability. Whenever a land you control enters, you gain 3 life. This just does everything. The one real problem with this card is just that it's so expensive. And by the time you cast it, most of your creatures and non-creatures and lands are already going to be out of your hand probably, and you won't have as many things left over to trigger it. That being said, the card pool for Standard right now is absolutely monstrous, so there will absolutely be some sort of way to ramp into this while still gassing up and going insane. It might be a really crazy target for Doppelgang. Not only are you making multiple copies of a bunch of other things, but also making copies of Primeval Bounty and getting exponentially more triggers. It could just get absolutely ludicrous. That seems kind of interesting to me. So I think this card has a ton of potential. It just needs to find just the right deck. Next up, we've got Rampaging Baloths, 2 green and 4 for a 6/6 beast with trample, and it has a landfall ability. So whenever a land you control enters, you may create a 4/4 green beast creature token. This card's great. The only problem with this card is that it needs to survive in order to get value off of it. You play it on 6, they play a piece of spot removal and kill it immediately, and that sets you way back on tempo, and you have nothing to show for your 6 mana investment, and that can be pretty rough. But if you can get this onto the battlefield and keep it there, just being able to generate free 4/4s every time you play a land is kind of nuts. So I don't know, maybe. I think if it does see play, it's going to need to see play at the top end of a deck where every single creature it's playing is a must-answer threat, so that by the time you get around to playing the Baloths, they're out of removal, you can stick it and start getting that value. Might be good in something like that. But next up, we've got Serac the Hunt Caller, a 5/4 legendary human warrior for 2 green and 2. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if creatures you control have total power 8 or greater, target creature you control gains haste until end of turn. Pretty cool card. A 5/4 for 4 is kind of alright to begin with. And as long as you have the hoops jumped through, the what you need enabled for this to trigger, the total power of 8 or greater, every turn you get to give the thing you just played haste. That seems pretty good. It's also worth noting it can target itself. So as long as you have at least 3 powers worth of creatures, in addition to this guy, he immediately swings in with haste. And so if you see him as a 5/4 haster for 4, he starts to look way more reasonable, especially in like a mono green Stompy style deck, or maybe a Gruul Stompy style deck. So yeah, 5/4 haste that then gets to give one creature every turn haste for the rest of the game. Seems like it could be pretty good. It really depends on if that kind of deck ends up being viable in Standard. I hope mono green comes back. I hope some kind of a Stompy deck can be a thing in Standard again, because it hasn't been in quite a while. Next up, we've got Vizier of the Menagerie. This is a 3/4 Snake Cleric for 1 green and 3. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may cast creature spells from the top of your library, and you can spend mana of any type to cast creature spells. So you jam this down for 4, and for as long as it stays out, you can start ripping creature cards off the top, playing them from the top, and getting a ton of card advantage by not having to play things from your hand, saving the things from your hand until they inevitably deal with the Vizier and get it off the table, which is kind of nice. But what's even cooler is you can spend mana of any type to cast creature spells. So in a weird way, it kind of helps color fix you. And play things that you might not have the right colors to play under other circumstances. And I'm not sure what kind of deck would set itself up in a way where it needs that. But as a nice bit of silver lining, that's pretty cool. Next up, we've got Wildborn Preserver. This is another one I'm pretty excited about. This is a 2/2 Elf Archer with Flash and Reach for 1 green and 1, which is already pretty good by itself. It's already decent. But whenever another non-human creature you control enters, you may pay X. When you do, you put X +1/+1 counters on this creature. So every non-human that you play, you can dump all your excess mana into just beefing this guy up. Just 1 mana, 1 +1/+1 counter for every mana that you spend. That seems pretty nuts. Because the creature is already pretty well statted for its cost, 2/2 Flash Reach for 2, having this ability being pure, utter gravy that has a ceiling that's super high, that could scale to insane heights, just seems really awesome. So, yeah, if there's a Flash deck that uses green, this might be a big part of that deck. Really, really cool card. I like seeing it come back. But that brings us to our multicolor cards. Oh baby, let's get into it. Okay, so Aurelia the War Leader, a 3/4 legendary angel with flying, vigilance, and haste for 6 mana in the colors of Boros. That is a mouthful, but whenever Aurelia attacks for the first time each turn, you untap all creatures you control, and after this phase, there is an additional combat phase. Oh my god. We've already seen how crazy additional combat phases can work with things like Fear of Missing Out, and Urabrask's Forge. Being able to unconditionally get an extra combat step could be insane, especially because you are untapping your Fear of Missing Out, which means you get to get 2 different triggers on your Fear of Missing Out to get even more combat phases, even though some of those combat phases, not everything will be untapped, but still, that just adds gasoline to the fire, in my opinion. And then, like I said, if you have an Urabrask's Forge down while you're doing all of this, potentially getting 4 Urabrask's Forge triggers off of an Aurelia and a Fear of Missing Out seems nuts in the same turn. So, yeah, this is wild. I mean, it is expensive. It's very expensive, but I think in the right deck, this can just be an absolute back-breaking, game-winning play. I'm excited to brew with it for sure, because, like I said, there's already some support for kind of going this direction with stuff like Fear of Missing Out. So, yeah, let's brew with this. But next up, we've got Ailey Eternal Pilgrim, a 2/3 legendary core cleric with Death Touch for 2 mana in the colors of Orzhov. You can pay 1 mana, sacrifice another creature to gain life equal to the sacrificed creature's toughness. You can also pay 3 mana in the colors of Orzhov, sacrifice another creature, exile target non-land permanent, but activate only if you have at least 10 life more than your starting life total. This card is nuts, man. If you're playing this in a life gain deck, it's going to be pretty easy to get to 30 life and just stick there or higher, right? And if you get to 30 life and you can just stay above 30 life, every single creature becomes 3 mana sack, exile a non-land permanent. Every creature on the board turns into the most insane Vindicate you've ever seen. That's just nuts. And the fact that if you're not at 30 life and you need to get to 30 life, it's got this other activated ability where instead those creatures can become a thing that you sack to gain the life you need to get up to where you need to be so that you can start sacking creatures to kill their stuff again. That just seems nuts to me. And it's a Death Toucher. So it's even pretty good on curve before you get to all that craziness. If your opponent's being super aggressive with big threatening plays, you just jam this down, and now they can't effectively attack into you. Like, this card just kind of does everything we want. Man, I can't wait to brew life gain decks in this standard environment. It's going to be so fun. I love this card, and I am so excited. So, welcome Ailey, let's do it. But next up, we've got Drogskol Reaver. This is a whopping 7 mana in the colors of Azorius. It's a 3/5 flying, double striking, life linking spirit, and whenever you gain life, draw a card. Now, because of the double strike and the life link, when you attack or block, you will draw 2 cards. Give this thing Vigilance, swing in, draw 2 cards. Block their guy when they attack, draw 2 cards. That seems crazy. The one big downside is obviously it costs 7 mana, and that is a lot. And I think if you're playing this in like a Reanimator deck or something like that, there are options for Reanimator targets that can just win the game a lot quicker than bringing this thing back and trying to use it to draw a bunch of cards. So I'm not quite sure where this card fits in. Maybe there's some other way of cheating this into play that isn't necessarily a Reanimator deck. Hard to say, but the potential for this card is through the roof. The power is absolutely insane. It gets you a ton of card advantage. It is a win condition. It pads out your life total to win races. It gets past all their guys on the ground. It's just insane. The card's insane. It just needs the right deck. And I don't know if that deck exists right now. But hopefully, because the card's awesome and I want to play it. So if you have ideas about how to build around this card, the best way to use it, where it's going to make the most impact, definitely let me know in the comments. I think it has a lot of potential. It just, like I said, it just needs to be in just the right deck. Next up, we've got Halana and Elena Partners. It's really crazy thinking that this is going to be in standard for at least 5 years. This is a 2/3 legendary human ranger with first strike and reach for 4 mana in the colors of Gruul. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, you put X +1/+1 counters on another target creature you control, where X is Halana and Elena's power. That creature gains haste until end of turn. This thing is nuts. Not only is it a 2/3 first striking reacher, which is already pretty decent at kind of like holding the fort, but every creature you play from that point on is going to get haste and be able to swing in, and also get 2 +1/+1 counters when it does, so it swings in even bigger. But then it also has this scalability where if you have ways of making Halana and Elena bigger, then that ability to give out counters becomes exponentially better. You're giving out even more counters with every trigger if this gets even bigger. So we've seen in the past, this can be an absolute backbreaking, insane card in standard. Super, super good if there's the right decks to sort of help enable it. But we'll have to wait and see. I don't know if Gruul's a thing. I don't know if Gruul's gonna be a thing. If Gruul is a thing, this card will be there. It will. But next up, we've got Immersturm Predator. I kind of love this coming back. A 3/3 flying vampire dragon for 4 mana in the colors of Rakdos. Whenever this creature becomes tapped, you exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard and put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So a little bit of graveyard hate, which there is a ton of graveyard synergy in standard right now, so love seeing that. Gets bigger every time you do it, but also has this ability, sacrifice another creature. This creature gains indestructible until end of turn. Tap it. So you do have to tap it. So if you sacrifice something to give it indestructible, save it from removal or whatever, it's going to tap it down. You won't be able to block with it or whatever. But I mean, if they block you in combat, you're already tapped. And so at that point, if you sack a creature to keep your guy alive, you kind of don't care. And if you're swinging in combat, it's getting even bigger, turning into a 4/4, exiling something from their graveyard as well because it swung. And even if you're not swinging with it, even if you're holding it back as a blocker, when you activate that ability where you sack a creature to give it indestructible, you do end up tapping the Predator, which is going to trigger the other ability, let you exile something and put a counter on the Predator. So even if you have to use it in the worst case scenario way, you're still getting value there. Your Predator's still getting bigger. You're still getting rid of something in the graveyard. And I kind of love that. This has potential. I like that it's a vampire. I like that it's a dragon. There's potential for it to slot into those types of decks. But mostly I think this wants to be in some kind of a sacrifice tribal deck. But is this good enough for standard anymore? I'm not sure. Let me know in the comments. But next up we've got Maelstrom Pulse. 1 green, 1 black, and 1 for a sorcery. Destroy target non-land permanent and all other permanents with the same name as that permanent. Now the key thing about this card is that it does not have to target a non-token permanent. So, in a format right now that's going absolutely bananas with creating tokens, Maelstrom Pulse is pretty good. Worst case scenario, you hit their best thing and only their best thing for 3 mana, and that's still pretty good. Best case scenario, they make an insane amount of tokens that are going to win them the game, and then you just sweep up all of them with a Maelstrom Pulse without actually needing to cast a sweeper and keeping everything on your side of the board, and that feels wonderful. So I like seeing Maelstrom Pulse come back. Next up we've got Ovica, Enigma Goliath. This is another one that's already in standard right now, but again, when it would have rotated out, now it will stay in standard for the foreseeable future because it's in this set. This is a 6/6 legendary Phyrexian Nightmare with flying for 7 mana in the colors of Visit. That's a lot. It has ward 3 and pay 3 life, so it's hard to take down. And whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you create X 1/1 red Phyrexian Goblin creature tokens, where X is the mana value of that spell, and they gain haste until end of turn. I always wanted to use this card in some kind of a Reanimator deck, because you cast a Reanimator spell to bring it back, and then the next time you cast a Reanimator spell to bring something else back, it's a somewhat sizable instant or sorcery, 4 or 5 mana instant or sorcery, that will trigger this and make 4 or 5 1/1s. And you can kind of like keep doing that, and that feels really cool to me. Is something like that going to be viable in the near future? Probably not. But I like that this is going to exist in standard for the foreseeable future, and there's potential to still have a deck like that come together down the line. Next up, we've got Prime Speaker Zegana, a 1/1 legendary merfolk wizard for 6 mana in the colors of Simic. It enters with X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is the greatest power among other creatures you control, and when Prime Speaker Zegana enters, you draw cards equal to its power. That's crazy. So no matter what, you are drawing cards equal to your highest power creature, whatever that number is, +1. Because Prime Speaker Zegana is going to enter as that same power +1 because of getting that many counters. And you're just going to draw all those cards. So that seems nuts. This just refills your hand as long as you have some big boy out on the battlefield. So I guess what really matters is there a deck that's going to have a big boy out on the battlefield consistently and you're out of gas so that you could just slam Zegana and refill your whole hand? If that deck exists, and if it happens consistently enough, this card could be insane and absolutely worth playing. But it needs just the right deck. I think the biggest problem for a deck like that is there are so many sweepers, right? And the chance that, you know, they take out all of your creatures before you get a chance to play Zegana, and then she kind of whiffs, might be too risky, right? It might be too cute to win more. So I don't know if she makes the cut, but like I said, if there's a way to make that setup consistent enough, then she will see play and she'll be absolutely insane. But next up we've got Wiltleaf Liege. This is a 4/4 elf knight for 4 mana in the colors of Selesnya, but it's hybrid mana. So you can run this in mono white or mono green, or any deck that uses both the Selesnya colors. You could also, honestly, you could use it in any deck that has white and no green. It's just going to be a little harder to cast. And same thing for all green, and, you know, that has green and no white. It's just going to be really tricky to cast in those decks. So usually this is going to go in a deck that's at least Selesnya, just because of the 3 mana pips. But it's a 4/4 elf knight Other green creatures you control get +1/+1. Other white creatures you control get +1/+1. If a spell or ability an opponent controls causes you to discard this card, you put it onto the battlefield instead of putting it into your graveyard. So the way in which this is going to be the most valuable is as insanely good tech against the discard decks that are running rampant on the ranked ladder on Arena right now. The most notable one is probably the Nurturing Pixie deck that uses all of the enchantments that make you discard when they enter the battlefield, puts them back in your hand with Nurturing Pixie so you can do it again and make you discard even more. Being able to get a Wiltleaf Liege for free off of a Hopeless Nightmare on turn 1 seems insane. Seems really, really good. And at the very least, this is going to be a staple sideboard card to combat those kinds of decks, if not main deckable. But it might be main deckable, especially if you're in a deck where all of your creatures are both white and green, because if that's the case, then all of your creatures are going to get double buffs from this. It's like a double anthem. If it's a white and a green creature, it's going to get both +1/+1. So maybe this is main deckable in just the right crazy Selesnya multicolor brew. But at the very least, this is definitely a crazy sideboard card against those Nurturing Pixie decks. So I'm excited that this is going to be in Standard. I'm kind of bummed I'm going to have to play against it because I really love my Nurturing Pixie deck. I think it's a little more unique than the other ones that I've seen out there, and it's been a lot of fun for me on the ladder. But still, I like that this exists. It's going to be a lot of fun. And that brings us to the artifacts. First up, we've got Basilisk Collar. 1 mana for an artifact equipment. Equipped creature has Death Touch and Lifelink, and it equips for 2 mana. I really like this card. I don't know how constructed viable it's going to be. 3 mana before you turn on the Death Touch and Lifelink is kind of a lot, and it doesn't give you any power boost or anything at all, so it doesn't help you, you know, apply more pressure to the opponent or anything like that. That being said, the Lifelink does help you kind of win races. The Death Touch allows you to have one of your small creatures trade for their biggest creatures, and then you just re-equip. I think this card would be a lot better if it cost 2 and had equip 1, but that's probably asking for too much. I think in the right deck, this is going to actually end up being kind of insane. Yeah, it's really hard to judge this card, honestly, without seeing it in action. I could see both sides of it. I could see it being, you're wasting your early turn curve playing something that isn't really impacting the board. I could also see the other side of it of, like, you're playing a deck that goes wide with all these crazy creatures. Maybe you're playing, like, the Dollhouse deck or whatever, and now your worst creature can just become a Death Touch Lifelinker and trade with theirs, and it becomes an absolute nightmare for the opponent. I could see this being really crazy, so jury's out. I feel like it could go either way. If you have any insight or ideas about how good this could be, or maybe things that I'm overlooking about it, definitely let me know in the comments, because I do think this has a lot of potential. It's really hard for me to gauge just how competitive it will be. But next up, we've got Cultivator's Caravan, a 5/5 vehicle with crew 3 for 3 mana, and it can tap to add 1 mana of any color. So this is sort of like a mana rock, a normal run-of-the-mill 3 mana, tap for a mana of any color mana rock, except the upside is it can be a creature. You can crew it for 3 and turn it into a 5/5 if you need to. And if you're on the blocks, you can actually block with the 5/5 and then still tap it for mana to cast like an instant as well, which is kind of cool. I don't know if this quite makes the cut in Standard, but if there's some kind of a vehicle deck, which we do have Aether Drift coming in February, right? The first set of next year, and that is going to be very, very vehicle focused. So my gut says this is another one of those cards that's trying to be forward thinking and isn't going to make much of an impact right now, but then when Aether Drift launches, there's probably going to be a ton of crazy vehicle synergies that make this card way, way better. It's like, oh, I get my mana rock, but it also gets all of these vehicle synergies just because it happens to be a vehicle. That could be nuts, right? So we're going to have to wait and see, but my gut tells me that when Aether Drift comes out, this card will be super relevant, and until then, it's going to kind of fly under the radar. Next up, we've got Darksteel Colossus, 11 mana for an 11/11 artifact creature golem with trample and indestructible. this thing is an absolute monster. And if Darksteel Colossus would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, reveal it, shuffle it into its owner's library instead. I want to use this with Caustic Bronco. That's the main thing that I want to do with this. This seems like an insane hit off Caustic Bronco, dealing 11 damage to the opponent if you saddle it. And then also, it has a little bit more efficiency with Caustic Bronco as well, because it puts itself back into the library anytime it would be put into a graveyard, which just means you're more likely to hit it off of a Bronco than, you know, something that would just stay in your graveyard. So nice little bit of extra synergy as well for Bronco. Is it actually good enough to do that at the end of the day? I don't know. Standard's nuts right now. The card pool is crazy. The power level of the decks is so high. I don't know if that would be too cute and not good enough. But I think the potential's there at least. And that seems really good to me. Next up, we've got Maze Mine Tome. It's crazy seeing Maze Mine Tome come back. I haven't seen this card in so long. It makes new Standard feel like old Standard in a way. 2 mana for an artifact. Tap, put a page counter on this artifact to scry 1, which is a nice little bit of silver lining value. If you can't do anything else with the Maze Mine Tome, you can at least scry 1, try to get closer to the card that you absolutely need to come back against whatever game you're playing, whatever opponent you're up against. You can also pay 2, tap it, put a page counter on this artifact to draw a card. So that's what you usually want to do. You want to use this as a draw engine, but it is going to require mana to do that. And then when there are 4 or more page counters on this artifact, you exile it, and if you do, you gain 4 life. So the reason this is so good is its card advantage that also lets you kind of pad out your life total against aggro. And in the past, in Standard, when this saw play, that 4 life ended up actually mattering a lot and would usually happen just in time to really stop them from being able to kill you and kind of buy you an extra turn, which is super, super important. And that on the back of potentially drawing up to 4 cards with this, or at least scrying 4 cards deeper into your deck, closer to the cards you need to stabilize, maybe a Wrath effect or something like that, is a lot of value, honestly. Is it going to be the staple go-to card draw engine that it used to be when it was first in Standard? I don't know. It's hard to say. I do feel like power creep is a thing, and things are a little crazier now than they used to be, especially with the 3-year rotation. But I think Maze Mine Tome still has a chance to make a huge impact in the format. I just don't know for sure if it's going to. So we'll have to wait and see, but definitely worth trying out. Next up, we've got Pyromancer's Goggles. 5 mana for a legendary artifact, taps for 1 red mana. When that mana is spent to cast a red instant or sorcery spell, you copy that spell, and you may choose new targets for the copy. This card is going to be bananas in just the right build. I kind of want to use it in like big red, mono red control, or maybe some kind of multicolor control deck where you're copying insanely valuable spells, whether they're mono red spells or multicolor spells that have red in the cost so that they still count as red, and you get a copy of it. You can get a lot of value off of this. The problem is it doesn't really do anything the turn that you play it, so it definitely has to be in a control deck where you're controlling the board super well, and then you find some breathing room to you know, sneak this out really quick, get it on there so you can start to utilize the value. The other thing you can do that's really cool with Pyromancer's Goggles is if you have a card that lets things that produce mana for you produce additional mana, you can use this to get 2 red mana when you tap it, and then if you put each of those points of red mana into a different spell, you can copy both spells. So there are some ways to sort of bend this card or potentially break this card if you're combining it just the right ways with just the right cards that are going to help you like increase the amount of mana this generates. And that seems kind of crazy. That might be a fun deck to try and build, and there is a small chance that something like that could be insanely competitive, although more than likely it would just kind of be jank and a bit to win more. But there is potential. This card has insane power potential, so the potential is definitely there, for sure. It's worth messing around with. But next up, we've got Ramos Dragon Engine. This is a 4/4 legendary artifact creature dragon with flying for 6 mana. Whenever you cast a spell, you put a +1/+1 counter on Ramos for each of that spell's colors. So yes, if you cast the 𝐼𝑛_Mizzet, this thing gets 5 +1/+1 counters off the 𝐼𝑛_Mizzet. Kind of nutty. Also, you can remove 5 +1/+1 counters from Ramos to add 10 mana to your mana pool, but activate only once each turn. That's right, you get a WUBRG, right? So if you spend 5 mana on casting a bunch of multicolor spells that give you those 5 counters, you can then remove the 5 counters, get 10 mana, cast even more spells, get even more counters, and it kind of stops there. You can only activate it once a turn, right? But that will give you an insane amount of board presence. You can basically potentially get 15 mana worth of value off of spells played from 5 mana on the field. Potentially, you could turn 5 mana into 15 mana worth of value, which is kind of nuts. And not only do you end up with all of those spells cast, but at the end you end up with a whole bunch of +1/+1 counters on Ramos as well. So this could be nuts. This could be the center of a new combo deck, some kind of crazy, ridiculous 5-color insanity. And if that deck's a thing, if you have ideas about how to make that deck a thing, definitely let me know in the comments. There has to be, right? There has to be a way to break this damn thing and turn it into an absolutely insane combo engine. We gotta find it. We gotta figure it out, guys, because I have a feeling it's gonna be nuts. Next up, we've got Steel Hellkite. 6 mana for a 5/5 flying artifact creature dragon. And you can pay 2 to give it +1/+0 until end of turn. You can do that as many times as you want. You can also pay X, destroy each non-land permanent with mana value X whose controller was dealt combat damage by this creature this turn. Activate only once each turn. Pretty interesting ability. My only real problem with this is that it costs so much. 6 mana for a card that potentially does nothing the turn it comes out is kinda rough. It's really easy to kill it. It dies to most removal outside of burn removal. Even 5 or more burn removal could kill it too. But if you can survive a turn cycle or give it haste, maybe with like Enduring Courage or something like that, being able to swing in and then just choose a mana value and kill everything of that mana value seems kind of nuts, especially if you're able to carefully choose a mana value where you dodge it, you don't lose anything, you take out their best thing, and maybe you take out some other stuff along with it, and it's reusable. You just do it every turn, right? You can only activate it once a turn, so you can't keep killing different mana values worth of things on the same turn, but each turn you can activate it, so this could accrue a ton of value over time and just take over the game if it's not dealt with, but it's kind of easy to deal with and a little bit expensive, so it's one of those cards that it's really hard to say how impactful it will be on Standard. My gut says too expensive, too cute, takes too long, has to survive a turn cycle. Probably not quite there, but the absolute insane potential of the ceiling for this card is so high that I'm not going to count it out completely, especially, like I said, with the ability to potentially give it haste with stuff like Enduring Courage. That makes the possibility of playing this card go way, way up. If you could just swing with it the turn it comes into play, activate its ability that same turn, get value off of it regardless of if they end up untapping and killing it with removal, this becomes a lot better, so we'll have to wait and see. But next up, we've got a rare. Crawling Barrens is coming back. This enters untapped. It can tap for a colorless mana. You can pay 4 mana to put 2 +1/+1 counters on this land, and then you may have it become a 0/0 elemental creature until end of turn. It's still a land. So what's cool about this man land is you can keep making it bigger and bigger and bigger if you have extra mana to dump into it and nothing to do with that mana, without actually turning it into a creature. So if you think, like, for example, your opponent has a shock, you could put 2 +1/+1 counters on this and choose to have it not become a creature that turn, because you know they're going to respond and kill it with the shock. And then next turn, you could pay 4, put 2 more +1/+1 counters on it, and then choose to have it become a creature, but it's a 4/4 creature. Now that shock they had is useless and they can't kill it. So I like the versatility of being able to, even if you don't want to turn it into a creature that turn, if you have mana you're not using, being able to actually get a nice mana sink out of this, make it that much bigger for eventually down the line, when you do turn it into a creature, it's a much bigger creature. This card was really good in Standard the last time it was in Standard, and I have a feeling it'll make an impact here. So, excited to see it coming back. But now we're going to move on. We've got a handful of other random rares and mythics at the end here that weren't put into their colors, and that's because their collector number, the number of the card in the set, didn't line up with the color segregations that I did before, and I thought that was kind of weird, so I figured I'd just stick them all at the end and ask you guys if you knew why there seemed to be a bunch of random assortment of colored cards at the end of the set that have the final set numbers that weren't lumped in with their colors like all of the other ones. But if you have any idea about that, let me know in the comments, or is it just random? I don't know. But we're going to go over them the way they were intended. So this is a 5/5 Legendary Angel for 2 white and 3. That's right, Lyra Dawnbringer is back in Standard. It has flying, first strike, lifelink, and other angels you control get +1/+1 in lifelink. This is Mama Serra Angel. This is the new norm for a Serra Angel style card. I love seeing it in Standard. I love the idea of it being top end for Angel Tribal. I love everything about it. We're going to brew Angels for sure. This card's going to be in it. It's going to be nuts. You can play this on turn 4 with Giada, and that seems nuts. I'm super excited. But next up, we've got Rite of Replication. This is 2 blue and 2 for a sorcery. Create a token that's a copy of target creature. So it's a 4-mana clone spell, except the clone's a token, so it can trigger things like Caretaker's Talent and stuff like that, which is pretty interesting. And then it also has Kicker 5, and if the spell is kicked, you create 5 of those tokens instead. So if you have a bunch of extra mana and you can afford to pay 9 for this, you're going to make 5 copies of whatever creature you want. And that seems bananas. Again, this sort of reminds me of the Doppelgang deck that's going around right now and might be used in a similar fashion to Doppelgang, but I'm not sure if this is better than Doppelgang or not. I guess the one silver lining to this card is that it can be played for just 4 mana earlier in the game. You're not stuck waiting until you get to an insane amount of mana. So if you're desperate, you need to hurry up and make a copy of your best thing to hold off their aggro, or because you see an opportunity to win the game then and there and not have to build up to a ton of mana. You have the versatility to do that, which is pretty cool. But again, not entirely sure if it makes the cut in those Doppelgang decks, but maybe there's some new deck that wants to use it in a new way. I like the card a lot, so I'm excited about it, and I hope it sees play in something. Next up, we've got Massacre Worm. I love this card coming back to Standard so much. You don't even understand, guys. A 6/5 Phyrexian Worm for 6 mana, 3 black and 3. When this creature enters, creatures your opponents control get -2/-2 until end of turn, and whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, that player loses 2 life. So, absolutely wipe the board against all of those annoying aggro decks, and maybe kill them in the process because they lose 2 life for each of those creatures that dies. That sounds wonderful. I mean, sure, this guy's really expensive. By the time you can hard cast him, aggro decks are probably already killing you, that sort of thing, but you're not hard casting this, right? We're playing this in Reanimator decks. We're using Rite of the Moth, probably. We're using other cheeky ways to get this into play, most likely. I don't entirely know exactly what direction I want to go with Massacre Worm, what's going to be the best direction to go with it as far as deck building, but I'm just happy it exists in Standard again, and I'll get around to figuring out what I want to do with it down the line. But if you have ideas already about what you want to do with this card, how you want to build around it, or what kind of deck you want to fit it into, definitely let me know in the comments, because I will be brewing with it for sure, and I'm excited to see what your takes end up being. Next up, we've got Gratuitous Violence. 3 red and 2 for an enchantment. If a creature you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double that damage instead. Yeah. This card's good. It's scary. I have no idea where this is going to end up, but it will probably end up somewhere, and I'll probably get really salty about it and be angry about facing it on the ladder. I don't know, I guess it's possible this is just 2 win more and doesn't see play. But there's that part of me that just thinks I'm going to get salty losing to this card. I don't know, we'll wait and see. But next up, we've got Gigantosaurus, 5 green mana for a 10/10. And that's it. It's cool that they did the full art frame here for this card just as the normal art, I'm pretty sure. So like this is just the basic version of the card that you'll get. Since it doesn't have any text, they don't need to put the text box there. Kind of love that. So this is a fun one. Mono green might make a comeback, and if it does, I think this will be a part of that because it's pretty strong. You want ways to give it like trample and stuff if possible. But yeah, from a flavor perspective, I like that the 5 mana 10/10 is back in standard. We'll have to wait and see if it actually sees play. My favorite card. My favorite card coming to standard in this entire set, including the base set. This is Adaptive Automaton, a 2/2 artifact creature construct for 3 mana. As it enters, you choose a creature type. This creature is the chosen type in addition to its other types, and other creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1. This is just tribal overload. The fact that this can be whatever creature type you want, fit into whatever tribal deck you want, and act as a lord for the creatures of that tribe is nuts to me, especially because it's a colorless card. It has no restrictions. Any tribal deck at all probably wants to run this. Maybe I'm too high on it. Maybe it's not as good as I'm thinking, but I don't know. There's just a part of me that absolutely loves this card and wants to find as many different ways to crack all the potential out of this thing as I can in as many different tribes as possible. Roaming Throne is still in standard, so the idea of using Adaptive Automaton and Roaming Throne in some kind of a tribal deck, both of them being so splashable, being able to go into any color decks, whatever you want. Yeah, I don't know. I love this card. Do you have a tribe specifically that you'd want to use this card with? Let me know in the comments. I think the potential is endless here for a card like this. I'm just excited. Rats. Let's use it in Rat Tribal. Skeletons. Let's use it in Skeleton Tribal. Let's move on. Gilded Lotus. 5 mana for an artifact. Tap to add 3 mana of any one color. I like this being in the set. I like that there is some sort of a Lotus in the set, right? Just thematically, we need to have some kind of a Lotus in the foundational set of Magic the Gathering because it's such an iconic thing. Obviously, we weren't going to get Black Lotus. I wouldn't want Black Lotus. That would be... Standard's powered crept enough as it is. We don't need to go there. But it's cool seeing Gilded Lotus here to kind of fill that flavor spot. Now, I don't quite think it's good enough to see play in Standard, but there might be a deck that makes room for it. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking maybe the artifact decks. What is that blue card from the big score from the Thunder Junction set? 3 mana, and it's an artifact that scries when it enters, and then whenever you play an artifact that's 3 or more mana, you get to make a token, and the token's as big as however many artifacts you have. Something like that, I think, might be able to utilize this to great effect. You know, play it, get a big token, use its mana to play another thing and get another big token. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But next up, we've got our last card of the day. This is Maze's End. It enters tapped. You tap it for a colorless mana, or you can pay 3, tap it, return this land to its owner's hand, search your library for a gate card, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle. If you control 10 or more gates with different names, you win the game. Maze's End is super cool. It's been a staple of older formats for a while, enabling gates decks that only use gates as land to use this as a win condition. And those decks are super cool, so I like the idea of something like this coming into Standard. And it's worth noting, we didn't go over them because we didn't cover the commons or uncommons from this starter set, but there are an entire cycle of gates. All of the gates, one for every single color combination, do exist in this starter set, so those are all in Standard. So every single gate is there and ready to be used with Maze's End, and gates decks are going to be a thing in Standard again. I don't know how good it's going to be. I don't think we have any of the extra payoff for gates decks that older gates decks have, other than just the Maze's End here. So I don't know how viable it will actually be, but I still love that it's a thing that could exist. The potentials here, maybe control decks will go this direction and use this as their win condition so that every single card in their deck can just be interaction and card draw, and they don't have to worry about having a win condition outside of their mana base. I don't know, that might be a thing. Is a Gates deck gonna be a thing again in Standard? Let me know in the comments. I think that would be crazy if it was, but obviously there's potential for that to happen. And that's going to do it for today's video, guys. Thanks so much for joining me. Like I said earlier, if we get an update on how this starter set is implemented on Arena and stuff, I might make another video just letting you guys know what's going on and how you can get these cards. But Standard is looking pretty insane moving forward, and I'm excited to brew. Please like this video if you haven't already. It helps me get it out to more people. It helps the channel grow, and I appreciate it a ton. Subscribe if you're new, because I have a bunch more videos on the way, and I'll see you next time. Until then, catch me live Monday through Friday over on Twitch. That's twitch.tv/QuarantineCapricorn, because if I'm alive and I'm breathing, I'm there and I'm streaming. Bye for now. I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's video, Wonders of the First. Wonders of the First is a brand new collectible card game similar to games like Magic the Gathering, Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon, featuring a unique action-based resource economy that helps avoid pitfalls like Mana Flood or Mana Screw, and a battlefield containing multiple realms that unlock over time as you fight for control of the stones. The first 400 card set is called Existence and will launch to retail in the fall, but playtest team starter kits are available to order now. And they haven't forgotten about all you collectors out there. The game contains alternate borderless art variants, as well as highly sought after limited edition numbered prints, culminating in a one-of-one stone foil. And the best part is that the developers have a community-first approach, with 8 print-and-play decks available on their website, as well as a version of the game available on Tabletop Simulator, all for free. For more information, be sure to check out wondersccg.com today. That's wondersccg.com. Thanks so much for checking out my channel. I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons over at Patreon. Without you guys, this channel would not be possible, so honestly, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your contributions. If you haven't yet, like and subscribe. The more likes we get and the quicker we get them, the bigger this channel will grow and the faster it will grow. I'd love nothing more than this channel to become something very special for you guys, but it's entirely up to you how fast that happens. Also, if you'd like more deck techs, that's somewhere over there. And if you'd like to see what else the channel's been up to lately, that's somewhere up that way. Also, subscribe, circle below, do all the things.